About an hour.
Oh, as long as that. Okay. That's
Hi,
fine.
everyone.
Let's just see where
Happy,
we go.
yeah, happy to be live with Simon Gaul. Do you want to introduce yourself to our members and tell them a little about your book?
Good afternoon. I'm actually in America at the moment, and kindly being interviewed by your host. My name's Simon Gaul. I'm an author. I've written many books, from children's books to travel books, and I've just currently had published a second book in a trilogy of conspiracy theories, conspiracy theory books. This one's called No Man's Land. I'll just hold up a cover of it. Can you see it? Good, I hope so. And this book is set in 1990 in Boston and in Long Island, long before it became the playground of the rich and not quite so famous, perhaps. And it's basically set around the art theft, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in March 1990, St. Patrick's Day, which is the greatest and largest art theft, and it's completely unsolved. All 13 pieces of work were stolen. 3 Rembrandts, a Vermeer, a Manet, and despite millions of reward, nothing has ever come to light in 35 years. And no one knows where any of those works of art are. Conservative value today over $500 million, if anyone could if even that was accurate. And the backdrop is also the demise of an American, what's the best way of describing it? Way of life, the traditional fisherman. So if there is such a thing as a goodie, he's the fisherman, a man called Jake Dealer. And the baddie is the owner of an auction house based in Boston, where the theft takes place. And I weave the story, and the two meet, as to what actually happens to the art in the end. And there is a very classical arc to the story, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I invite you, the reader, hopefully, to decide if you think the end is sufficient as to where the art might be.
I think I was discussing this when I started reading your book. I think I started watching a documentary about the art theft.
Yes, there's been lots of documentaries about the art theft. There was a Netflix series on it.
That's probably the one I started watching.
Yeah, which incidentally was made about 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm not being disparaging towards Netflix. It's not very good and it's not very accurate. I'd like to point out here that all my research takes place over a period of years, and is all done shoe leather. So everywhere in the book that you come across, whether it's Long Island, whether it's Boston, whether there's an island way just south of Nova Scotia, out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, called Tinnicus Island, which is the smallest, the last piece of America that's in the Atlantic, I have visited with my own shoe leather. Most of my research was done with the Boston Globe. I lived in Boston for a while researching it, and obviously at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. I lived in Long Island for quite a long time, and became friends with an awful lot of the fishermen there. They're called baymen. And unfortunately, they no longer really exist anymore, because the houses they lived in have now been bought, and are now their estates. The few that are left moved to North Carolina to carry on fishing. And sadly, the entire fishing industry, from effectively Nova Scotia all the way down to Long Island, so the Canadian border right the way down to Long Island and a bit below, has in America effectively died off, which is a very tragic tale, because the baymen have been there for over 300 years. And there's no baymen left in Long Island.
And Jake's the bayman in your book is quite an interesting character in his own right, isn't he? Because you're delving into that sort of way of life with him, but he has quite a backstory, doesn't he?
Yes, Fun enough, I made a note, and thank you again for your notes on this, on that particular book, because having on that book, I when I've written a book, I suppose I need to let it percolate, and I leave it for a while, and I found myself rereading it about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So 3 months after the final publication, after the book was sent off to the printers, etc., and there's some distance, which meant I was able to read it as a story again from the outside, even though I knew the end, beginning, the middle, and the end, and without giving any plot lines away. There's a fairly brutal beginning, as you will picked up on, Kaz, and if you can get past that brutal beginning, the rest of it does fall into place, hopefully. And Jake does have an extraordinary backstory, but it's a true backstory, Kaz. I knew Jake. There was a real Jake who I met, a man called Danny King, now sadly recently passed away in the last couple of years, who was the chairman of the East Hampton, Long Island Baymen's Association. And Jake is loosely based on him. And also based on that extraordinary song that Billy Joel wrote in 1989. And the book, don't forget, is set in 1990, called The Downeaster Alexa, about the beginning of the death of the Baymen. And oddly, Danny King features in that little clip. You wouldn't know, but I mark it up at the end of the book in the afterword.
You've got a songwriter in the book as well, haven't you? Who,
yes, I do have a songwriter in the book who has a slightly more than passing resemblance to one Mr. Billy Joel, I'm afraid, who I became quite good friends with, very good friends with, actually, over the last 30 years. And he was one of the original inspirations to writing the book. He sent me a copy of Peter Matheson's book called Men's Lives, which is about the Baymen, which became a big bestseller in America. And it's about the fishermen and their lives and their history and the Montaukett Indians, the Native Americans. And that gave me an idea that I wanted to write a book about, but I didn't quite have a hook. And within a very short period of time in 1990, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was plundered and robbed, and the mystery began. And I found a way, so I won't give away now, of linking the Baymen's story to the greatest, as then was, theft of all time. But everyone thought it would now have been solved. It has still never been solved. Not one, I repeat, not one of the 13 pieces of art that was stolen has ever been found, seen, or in any way discovered.
there were some quite interesting facts about the museum, though, I thought, in it, that you were saying, like, I'm presuming these are true based on your research, but you were saying, like, their insurance coverage wasn't the best. And,
Yes.
like, they were weirdly stored for the paintings, and they're not very big fans of the museum, the people in the book, are they?
No, they're not fans of the museum, and a lot of that went back to, there was a genesis to that, which in 1911, the Mona Lisa was stolen in broad daylight from the Louvre in Paris. It was simply unhooked off the wall by one of the members of staff at the Louvre, put under their smock. They all had to wear white smocks as uniform, and he walked out the door with it. Simple as that. The Mona Lisa in 1911 was just stolen in broad daylight by one man who was an Italian who believed it belonged in Italy. And he left Paris and went back to his little studio in Italy. And the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was a museum started by a lady called Isabella Stewart Gardner, who left a very peculiar will. This is all fact, which meant that nothing could be touched in this fake Venetian palazzo she'd built in the middle of Boston if anything was stolen. Nothing could be replaced, nothing could be moved. There are several thousand works of art. There are several thousand objects of art, like vases, chairs, furniture. It was very idiosyncratic, and her will stated nothing could be touched or moved. So when the paintings were stolen, the museum, which of course had no insurance because it had very little money to restore its paintings after she died, and it just fell into a degree of disrepair. Anyway, you can go to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum today and you can see empty frames where the paintings were, because there's no money to put another painting there and nothing could be touched. But, and here's the interesting human nature, it's become ever more popular because of that. A lot of people go to the museum to see the empty frames. And in the same way that after the Mona Lisa was stolen, it was missing for 2.5 years before it was found. There were queues and queues around the streets of Paris, around the Louvre, simply to go and see the space where the Mona Lisa was.
Well, I think we were drawn. I mean, this is why people are drawn to crime fiction, aren't we? We're sort of drawn to understanding why these things happen. So there's a fascination into knowing, like, why people might have taken stuff from the museum that draws you to go and see the empty frames. And
But what was interesting was in 1911, the Mona Lisa wasn't one of the main attractions of the Louvre. It is actually a very small painting. One's opinion of its beauty is entirely subjective, so I'm not going to make a point there on that. But there were queues and queues around it. One of America's most famous industrialists, J.P. Morgan, was in America, in France at the time, buying art for his museum. He was considered someone to have possibly stolen it. Franz Kafka, the German novelist, stood in line waiting to see the empty space. I mean, there were lines around the block simply to see where the Mona Lisa was hanging. Whereas when it was hanging there were no lines around the block to see it. And today, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum has, I'm not going to use the word profited, that sounds as if they had something to do with it. They didn't. But people are fascinated by seeing where the paintings were. They sold, just to remind everyone, 3 Rembrandts, 1 Vermeer, a Manet. It's the other bits and pieces were very personal. And in the writing of the book, I have to come up with the reasons to why each one of the paintings was cherry-picked. And obviously I can't give anything away because that would ruin the surprise.
it would, and there's a lovely, I mean, it's an utter spoiler, so we won't go into the details, but there's a lovely moment where one of the objects that's stolen is like somewhere in the office of the person who may or may not have done it, isn't there?
I love that. You love that. That's great. Well, thank you so much for that. Yes, there is. I mean, sorry, you and I go down that rabbit hole, and we're going to give a spoiler away. But it's a very small, semi-worthless piece, but it isn't actually, and it's stolen for a particular purpose. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, I like that. I thought it was quite a nice, like, addition to the story.
Yes, but I had to come up with a reason for why that particular item was stolen, which has no. And incidentally, whilst there is today still, there's a $10 million reward for any information leading to the recovery of the paintings, but there is a separate reward of $100,000 simply for the return of this very small piece that you are alluding to, Kaz.
Wow, really?
Completely separate.
Not know that.
Yeah.
See, I should have paid more. I should have finished the documentary.
Well, see, unfortunately, the documentary didn't go into that. It went into. It was quite. Just whilst you've mentioned that for a minute, it's worth just trying to recap for a minute or two the manner in which the theft took place. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was so poor it could only afford 2 guards only. And the artworks in there were and are and remain priceless. And they were both on minimum wage, both in their 20s, and very little happened. And two people wearing fake Boston police uniforms knocked on the door. They were allowed in against protocol, against rules. They wore no gloves. There was no cameras anywhere inside the museum, so nothing to dismantle. There was no central alarm system that went to the Boston police force, other than a button that one of these two could have touched, but they were sort of disarmed. Well, they weren't armed. They were sort of handcuffed before they could touch it. So there was no connection to the outside world. So these two thieves spent 81 minutes on their own in the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, plundering from a shopping list of what they were instructed to take by the person who commissioned the theft. No DNA was ever found by the FBI, and they wore no gloves, as confirmed by the guards. No hair follicles, nothing. This is only 1990. This isn't in the 18th century when DNA didn't exist. There is no trace, no photograph of either of the two thieves ever been found by the FBI or the Boston police force. They vanished into thin air. 81 minutes later, with their shopping cart, my word, obviously not a shopping cart, of plunder that they had, including that funny little piece that you alluded to.
Yeah, I did not know. You told me before we went live that this is like the second in a trilogy.
A trilogy of conspiracy theories. The first one was set in Italy in the late 1970s and early 80s, to do with the assassination of the then Italian Prime Minister, one Aldo Moro, and it's called White Suicide. They're all set in 3 different countries on purpose. And I won't go into that one. This one is set on the eastern seaboard of America. And the next one is will be called The First Rule of Law, and that's set entirely in the United Kingdom between 1911 and about 1980. And they're all conspiracy theories.
Are they all, all places that you've travelled to?
So I didn't quite...
I get the sense that you're quite a globetrotter. So are these all places that you've travelled to or lived?
Yes. I can't reiterate this enough. I have a very small little library, which is external from my house, which has no internet, never has had any internet at all. I keep 2 big shelves behind. There's lots of books in my library, obviously. It's not a big room. It's big enough. It's 600 square foot. And behind my 2 shelves, one is a reference shelf for any books that I'm working on at the time. So I read an awful lot. It's a bit like going to university, which I never did, by the way. You're always taught that you have to read around your subjects. So there's about 100 books on a combination of fishermen and art and artists currently on that reference shelf, about to be removed for the next book. And then the next one is dictionaries, books, thesauruses, grammatical books on decent grammar, all that kind of stuff. And I do spend a huge amount of time on the road. So everywhere I go to, everything I've written about is not internet referenced. There's so many, and I'm not being impolite about the internet, but there's so many errors that end up being repeated. Someone writes it and think it's good, but actually there's nothing quite like shoe leather.
Yeah. And you were saying about writing for the Boston Globe. Was that your route into wanting to be an author, or?
No, it was because it happened in Boston. There were 2 or 3 great writers who I met who worked for the Boston Globe. I introduced myself, and who were interested in the spin I was trying to put on it, which was a mixture between the fishermen, because don't forget there's an awful lot of fishermen that work out of Boston too, as you go further south to Gloucester, which was where, if you all anyone remembers, I'm sure everyone does, that tremendous book called A Perfect Storm, and that film called A Perfect Storm. The fishermen that got caught and sadly lost their lives, the 6 fishermen, they all came out of Gloucester. So the combination of fishermen from Boston, which is on the seaport, and the Boston Globe has followed this story because it's a story that's never gone away. And with each and every year that's gone by, this year being the 35th anniversary of the theft, nothing has ever recovered. The FBI won't close the case, but they can't find anything. Imagine, seriously, for a minute, in our television era, when so many of what we watch on TV is covered and solved by, oh, we found this DNA. Oh, we found this follicle of hair. Oh, there's a partial fingerprint. I repeat, 2 people wearing fake moustaches in fake Boston uniform, police, got into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and there was 2 people, both on minimum wages, both in their early 20s, in charge of this entire museum, with not one security camera, not one security mic, nothing, no external link. They simply overpowered the guards. They taped them to a radiator, put tape over their faces, and they had the complete run of this museum.
So I feel like that was more like the instigating part of the story. I think the story's not so much about like the theft as it is like the aftermath of the theft.
Yes, the aftermath of the theft is, I suppose, may I say, the meat and bones of the story. So I set up the actual facts of the theft, the fact that the museum didn't have any insurance. For example, the Vermeer that was stolen was owned originally bought by King George III at the time of the American War of Independence. And the Vermeer that was stolen is the twin to the one that still remains with the royal family in the royal collection. And at the time was obviously the private property of the Queen. And that obviously, now the King. And that obviously drives a part of the reason as to why that Vermeer was stolen. Vermeer only painted 36 paintings. And one of them is now hidden from view for the rest of life. I mean, I pose a simple question. Where are they? You can't. There's that old story. You tell 3 people and you tell the world. And there has to be 3 people who know about this: the two thieves, and the person who commissioned the theft.
Which is the point you make in the story. But we've got there's at the same time that we've got this story with Jake and the fisherman and the dying industry, we've also got the other side of the people who own the auction house and are quite well off and doing well and everything else, and they're like 2 sides of the Queen.
Very much so. I hate that again, going back to that classical theme, Kaz, there has to be, but stories need, excuse my language here, a goodie and a baddie. They need an antagonist and a protagonist. And they are 2 sides of a coin. How they come together and form one coin is obviously not a spoiler I'm not going to bring here. I'm sure you won't. You and I are dodging spoilers here. It's quite funny.
It's a tricky book to talk about without giving away spoilers, I think.
I tell you what was interesting. From some of the reviews I've had, especially in America and especially in the UK, it became quite binary. There were those, for example, Natasha Cooper, who writes the crime column for the Literary Review in London, reviewed the book, gave it an extraordinarily good review, and thank you, Natasha. But she very much came down on the side of Jake the fisherman. In America, some of the people came very much down on the Swire family, Zephaniah Swire and Ollie Swire, who are obviously, I'm going to use the word baddie again, the protagonists, the antagonists, I apologize. It was, yes, they came down on different sides. It was quite, Personally, Jake's my hero. I mean, Jake the fisherman is my hero because I think he stands and fights for everything he wants, which is the survival of his family, or what remains of his family.
I think that I don't know who I would come down on the side of, but I think they all have their own flaws and interests.
Did you have a favorite character, may I ask?
Yes. The lady who worked in the cafe.
Shannon.
Hmm.
Isn't it funny? That's really quite interesting. That leads us down a rabbit hole that we can go down. Shannon was based on another real character I knew and met. And while she didn't work in a diner, she was exactly like she is in the book. And there was a couple. When I write a book, I send it out in very much a rough draft to about 6 to 8 people who I know, and some of whom one or two of whom I don't know, but who have read my books, commented, and I just ask for their opinions and what they think. I'm just interested in a broad opinion of from other people. And 2 people I can think out of the 8 I sent this original manuscript to, both thought Shannon was a great character, and Dr. Jessie Flack, who, just for your listeners and your audience, is a child psychologist who's brought in to try and socially profile who might have committed such a crime. It was quite funny that those became 2 of the very popular characters, apart from Jake and what became known as the Swire Boys. What did you think of Jessie Flack?
She was all right. She's interesting because she kind of semi gets it right, doesn't she?
I liked her backstory.
Yeah.
Well, one of the people who read the book said there's actually a series of books in her alone in terms of further stories of Jessie Flack. But it's quite funny that you came down on the side of Shannon. I thought Shannon was a great character too. I really grew into Shannon as a character. She was quite a secondary character to begin with, and then she became quite a forceful driving character.
When you finish this trilogy, what would you be tempted to write next? Because obviously you do have someone like Jessie that you could kind of take off and do something with.
Very good question, Kaz. I tell you exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a real deep breath and just a bit of a rest. I'm doing that at the moment. It's when a book's out there, finished, done, and you're really happy with it, especially if it's been well received, like this has been. The film rights to this has been sold to, and White Suicide have both been sold. That's why I'm sitting in Miami when it's not tourist season, because I just wanted somewhere where I didn't have to take a manuscript for the first time in 6 years and edit it and read it again and correct it. I just wanted to take a deep breath. So I think, I'm not quite sure, but I am compelled by the Jessie Flack idea. I don't know. Writing books a bit like when we were kids. We used to do jigsaw puzzles long before the invention of iPhones and things. And I remember my parents teaching me that the first thing you have to do with a giant jigsaw puzzle is find the 4 corner pieces. Then you have to go and find the straight pieces. And then you start filling it in right into the middle until you've solved the jigsaw puzzle. And I think that's the pattern in which I write. So No Man's Land, the first rule of law, the third one, has its 4 corner pieces, and it's got a few straight lines. And I just wanted a bit of a break. So after that, maybe Jessie Flack, perhaps.
Fair enough. Have you got any kind of book events still booked for No Man's Land?
Yes, I think Nikki Mander's doing that. This has been well planned, and by the way, thank you very much for adjusting to my timeline on this and putting it back a bit. I really appreciate that, because that has given me time to sit down and reflect and enjoy the process of this interview itself.
Are you doing any live author appearances though? Anywhere else?
Yes, I'm going to be, whilst I'm here in America, I will have to be doing a couple of live things out in Long Island. Because I used to be a bookshop owner. I used to own the Travel Bookshop. It's quite a well-known bookshop in Notting Hill, the one from which that film was made. I'm very much okay with working with independent bookshops. I'm a real quiet supporter of independent bookshops. And so, for example, there's an independent bookshop in Martha's Vineyard where part of this book, No Man's Land, is set. Sag Harbor, where this book is also set, that I'm doing readings and signings and things like that.
See, I was reading mentioning the Travel Bookshop.
I'm mentioning the Travel Bookshops because I'm trying to give you a favour. I normally don't talk about it, but you're being such a friendly interviewer today. I feel the very least I can do is toss you that bone. And now that's opened the door for you to ask whatever you need to ask, and if you want to, by all means, ask it.
No, I was going to say we're in our group, we're very big fans of independent bookstores.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, I was in an independent bookstore for 25 years, if not longer. And I remember it got really quite bad for independent bookstores, and the numbers that were, the amount of bookstores, especially in the United Kingdom, that were closing, and in America. I mean, my favorite bookshop in New York, for example, Madison Books, had to close. And that was because of the advent of the Kindle and then the advent of Amazon and all the rest of it. Ironically, Amazon have now gone into the business of opening bookshops. I mean, it is a little bit ironic. But we used to have we had 5 staff in the Travel Bookshop, and I had a really good manager, a lovely lady called Sarah, who went on to become the manager of the Shakespeare Bookshop in Paris when we closed our doors. We didn't close our doors for financial reasons. We closed our doors for this is madness reasons. And we had a company Visa card, and it was used once a year for the office party, full stop, and it was kept in the bottom of the drawer. And I used to look at the accounts and see the Visa card right up to its maximum limit of nearly £4,000. And after about month 2 or 3, I said to Sarah, I said, what are we spending this kind of money on? And she said, Simon, you're not going to believe this, but it's cheaper for us to go to the Tesco's in Ladbroke Grove and buy certain titles than we can get from the suppliers. So I said, well, enough of that. I'm going to write to suppliers. So I wrote to HarperCollins and other suppliers and said, this is somewhat mad. I can go and buy a book at 50% discount at Tesco's. Yeah, this is a true story, in Ladbroke Grove. And yet I get 44% discount from you, HarperCollins. Surely you'd rather see us survive. And they went, well, no, discount stays the same. And the business model of having to go to Tesco's with large bags to buy copies of books to put on the bookshelf, cheaper than HarperCollins would sell me a HarperCollins book, I started to think it was a little Kafkaesque and a little absurd. Does that make any sense as to why we started to rethink things? And a lot of independent bookstores had the same problem.
Whereas now I think people are starting to champion them again.
I completely agree with you. I mean, if on my little website, my fun little website, you can buy it from Amazon, but we suggest that you buy it from the independent bookstore. There's an independent bookstore link. You buy it from them if you want to buy it online, obviously. I did a fair amount of work with James Daunt, and he same as me. James has gone on to do some extraordinary things with both his own book chain and Waterstones, and now Barnes and Noble in America. But that's a separate story. But we both started in the travel book business at the same time. And James is a great champion of the independent bookstore and empowering his own staff to do an awful lot of the choosing. Great fan of the independent bookstore.
Yeah. I'm more interested in your like globe-trotting adventures.
Right.
Well, I think that's what makes your books interesting, is the sort of, you've been to these places yourself, so they're very authentic.
Everyone. Do you remember there's a bit in the book, and again, it's not a spoiler alert. There's a very miserable port called Rockport, and it is as miserable as that. It's a fishing village, but it's not. There's nothing to really welcome it in any way, manner, or form. I went and lived in Rockport for a while, in some broken down little sort of bed and breakfast. But I got the flavour of it, and you remember what happened in Rockport, so we're not going there. We're dodging another spoiler alert here. But yes, I think I owe it to, if someone's going to buy my book, and they're going to share their time with me, then the least I can do is offer them as much authenticity as possible. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. But you said you'd written other things before this series. So you've written, did you say you'd written kids' books? And
yes, I wrote a couple. I didn't go to the North Pole. I wrote my very first book that I wrote became a bestseller. It's called Pushkin the Polar Bear, that takes place in the combination of the North Pole and the South Pole. I have to be honest, I didn't go to either of those. And then I've obviously, writing for the Travel Bookshop, I've written travel books as well. But I also used to write a lot of travel pieces for different magazines. I've written things I don't know. I wrote for Brides magazine about honeymoons. Yeah, I do it. I used to do a lot of long distance car rallies. I was on the 1990 car rally from London to Peking. That took 55 days. That was when the Soviet Union was still the Soviet Union. And I was writing for the Sunday Correspondent and broadcasting for Capital Radio and independent radio stations. And everything I wrote at the time or broadcasted had to go through Moscow. And then when I was in China, crossed over the mountains, had to go through what was then Peking, is now Beijing. I did another one from Panama City to Anchorage in Alaska. That doesn't sound quite as long as it sounds, but that was a very long. Central America and Mexico, huge places to traverse in a car. That was 27 days. Then I did one in Rio. I did one through the whole way through South America, from Rio right up north to the north of Chile, down through the Atacama Desert, right down to Tierra del Fuego, and then back up again to Rio. That was just over 50 days. Maybe I should write another book takes place in Rio de Janeiro in South America.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there somewhere that you visited that you haven't set a book yet and would maybe want to use as a location?
I think, very good question. I speak 3 languages fluently. And so the first book was set in Italy. I speak Italian. I speak French. I'm certainly not going to set a book in France. It's far too complicated, and the French are far too difficult anyway. Eastern seaboard of America, I've got a lot of friends in America. And as I said, I owed it very much to Billy Joel, who set me on this path on No Man's Land by writing that brilliant song and then sending me a copy of Men's Lives. And I found I had a lot of fun, and I mean fun in that proper old-fashioned sense of the word, writing No Man's Land. White Suicide was a lot of hard work, and it was political, and it too was voted Thriller of the Year by the Times. But this one was, I loved writing this book. This one I really loved writing, even down to the depravity of living in Rockport. And you know what I'm talking about, Kaz.
It feels like book 3 is going to be quite a challenge to write as well, because it goes across quite a span of years, doesn't it? So you're going to have to like historically get things correct.
Yeah, I see. I enjoy that. I enjoy that research. I have already started buying lots of. I've got a rough idea about it, and quite a large portion of it centers during the Second World War, where there was very much a dark side to what happened in the United Kingdom during that period, and it is not often talked about or written about. I'm not going to go into any more than that, but that's where I'm headed with that. And it starts in 1911 when a man is born, and how he grows up into the depression in the United Kingdom, and then the beginning of the war, and he makes armaments for the government, and it just I've got a very good broad outline for it, and then it ends up in the 80s in the middle of in the financial crash, in one of the financial crashes in London.
It's quite a unique idea, sort of exploring conspiracy theories as well, isn't it? And that's like an interesting concept for a thriller. What sort of inspired that? Have you always been interested in them? Have you just?
Yes, I've always been fascinated. There's very rarely a time when I'm totally fascinated by, for example, and I can't find a hook for it. So if anyone out there is reading this or listening and wants to give me a hook, please do. The Malaysian Airlines plane that took off from Kuala Lumpur, and instead of turning north where it was supposed to go up towards China, turned south and headed into the Indian Ocean, and nothing has ever been heard of it through any tracking devices, which we have. It's a modern day. It's the Malaysian Airways flight 157 from memory, 175. I'm slightly dyslexic, and that has never ever been solved. A couple of pieces of wreckage have fetched up on Madagascar Island. And that is just a total mystery. Something happened on that aircraft, and no one has a clue. And yes, so there's a book about that sitting on my shelf, sitting on my nightstand as we speak, but I can't find a hook into the story. There's quite a lot been written about it in terms of factual aviation stuff. I'm an ex-pilot as well, so I find that quite easy to understand. But I can't find a hook into the story. And also there's a side of me as an Englishman that wants to write a book set in England.
Yeah.
Italy is always full of conspiracy theories from beginning to end, from the first course of Ebola pasta to the very last piece of tiramisu. Everything is a conspiracy theory. Everything's a story. Everything's a drama. And Italy was great. A lot of hard work. The eastern seaboard of America was this very real tragedy as to what happened to the Bayman of Long Island and to Jake, and to an entire way of life. A 300-year-old way of life has now vanished from America. And I think that is very much a metaphor for where we are today, especially in America. I'm not getting political, and I won't get political, but I find what is happening in America today to be really quite terrifying. And I try and cut out the white noise of it.
I guess with your airline one, you could go in from the sort of company executives sort of level.
I personally think, from what I've learned and read and researched so far, that this was a mass suicide by a completely deranged pilot, who hadn't been picked up by. Malaysian Airlines is one of the top 5 airlines in the world. This is not some doohickey airline out of somewhere else. But I can't find a reason in his backstory, because he had a normal backstory, wife, children, everything else, totally normal.
I mean, he was a pilot.
Yeah, that's
Totally normal.
I know. So again, that's making up a story, but I'm trying to. No Man's Land is, so it's White Suicide. They are a mixture of fact and fiction, and it's very, very clear as to what is fact and what is fiction. And all I ask of the reader, hence my shoe leather, is for them to what's the word I'm looking for? For them to buy into the fact, because if they buy the fact, they'll buy the fiction. I mean, metaphorically buy. And the fact is all researched to 10 places of decimals. Each book takes at least 3 years to write.
Wow.
This
That's
book,
supposed to go around like staying in places and things.
I mean, I'm also a sailor. So, for example, all the stories about the Atlantic, okay? I've sailed across the Atlantic twice. I sailed up and down that seaboard right up to Nova Scotia on a wee sailing boat. So I've sailed those. I've been through those storms that Jake goes through. There's that bit where that character Marty Drew, based on Billy, crossing from Long Island up to Martha's Vineyard. I've been through storms like that. I can write about them with hand on heart. I don't say that as a boast. I simply say it as that's why it's in there.
Yeah.
I hope the reader gets that feeling and therefore will understand where the fiction is coming from. Does that make sense?
Well, no, it really does.
I mean, you very sweetly read the book. Thank you, Kaz. Did you? My language here. Did you dial into the ocean side of it?
Yes. I liked the ocean side of it. But I'm fascinated by things like that. Anyway, my dad was a trawlerman.
Well, there you go. Absolutely. Your father was a trawlerman. Your father comes from the same bloodline that Jake, the hero, came from. That's what Jake was.
Yeah.
He made his living in the hardest frontier in the world, which is
it's a wild experience, isn't it?
Yeah. It is a frontier. Jake refers to it as his land. That's his land.
Tell us what you've read recently and really enjoyed.
Isn't that funny? I made a funny little list this morning. I've just refinished No Man's Land again, but not as a draft, as actually a book. I picked it up as a book and read it, and I think it stood up to every test I would have applied to it. Would I have changed anything in it? Absolutely not at all. Anything by Ray Celestin, who wrote City Blues Quartet, which starts in 1900 and ends up in the late 1960s in America, which is a mixture of fact and fiction, is one of the greatest quartets of books ever written. And again, it's fact fiction with crime set against real people, not real people. I mean, Louis Armstrong, as a burgeoning musician, makes an opening sequence in the very first book called The Act. I reread that recently. I'm currently reading a book by Carl Hyacin, a new book he's written called Fever Beach, which is the second in a political satire. The first one was called Squeeze Me, about a boa constrictor that finds itself wild on Mr. Trump's estate he's not obviously known as Mr. Trump, but just the president, in Florida. And it is beyond hilarious, beyond satirical. Carl Hyacin writes for the Miami Herald, has written a great column. And this new one is about, not mentioned by name, obviously, but Mr. Trump's second presidency. And I just wanted some humor. I've been loving, I tend to read two books at the same time, Graydon Carter's autobiography, called When the Going Was Good, about the golden age of magazines, when Vanity Fair, they did the most extraordinary investigative journalism. It wasn't just it was just an extraordinary magazine under Graydon Carter, and his autobiography is brilliant reading too. And I'm saving Martin Cruz Smith, who wrote Gorky Park way back when, and he passed away only 2 or 3 weeks ago. And this book is set in Ukraine. All his books were set in Russia. And so I'm savouring that one because he's never going to be gracing our pages ever again.
I'm a big fan of Carl Hiaasen.
There's a bit of comedy going on in there. There was a good thriller I read by an American author called Chris Bojalian, called The Princess of LA, which was based on the Princess of Wales, but a Las Vegas show and a second-rate casino where they do their performances every night. She plays the Princess of Wales, and she's like a double for the Princess of Wales. And it's actually quite a good page-turning thriller. He wrote that TV series, The Flight Attendant, as well. That was really quite good. Bearing in mind that the subject matter is written in the present day, called The Princess of Las Vegas. It's very good. I'm trying to mix it up a little bit. Bit of biography, bit of fiction, but I certainly need a bit of humour going on in America at the moment. Hence reading Carl Hiaasen while I'm in Miami.
Well, you can't go wrong. I mean, Carl Hiaasen written it when you're in Miami, which is the perfect place to read him.
Absolutely.
He's such a good author. I love his books.
Did you read Squeeze Me, about this boa constrictor that goes mad on Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate?
No, I haven't. I've not got far into it yet.
Please, seriously, treat yourself to that.
I will. I'll go back and look for it.
It's
I really enjoy him. He's so good.
Really good. And Fever Pitch, the one I'm reading literally as we speak, is based on Trump too. A whole bunch of wacky characters, and of course everything's eco, and he can't stand the developers who are ruining the Everglades. Yes, it's great.
I watched a really good adaptation of one of his books on Apple TV.
Yes, Monkey. What was it? Bad Monkey. Yes, absolutely. It's set exactly where I'm staying at the moment. That was really good. Bad Monkey. It also was a very faithful adaptation to the book.
When they make an adaptation of No Man's Land, are you going to make a cameo?
No, I certainly wouldn't. But what was interesting was when the film rights were sold, which they were sold in galley form, I slightly tripped over a line there, which I shouldn't have done. And I asked my agent, I said, who would you wish cast on this? And a reasonably important agent, he said, we don't do wish casting. So I thought, oh, okay, that's a pity. So I went to the film company and I said, do me a favor, can you wish cast it? I'm only going to give you one hint here. And this is not giving anything away. And he gave me a very good wish cast, this particular producer, about a week later. And he said, don't laugh at this one. The character Ollie, okay? I'm not giving anything away. He's an octogenarian in very good shape. And he's a good character, I think. And he said, I'd like to cast Hugh Grant as Ollie. And I went, what? Where did that come from? He said, watch some of his most recent work when he's done some great TV series and some really dark things. And months later, I thought about it and I went, I have no creative control over this. When you sell your film rights, you give away your creative control. And I don't know what you think. How do you think, at first blush, Hugh Grant with full makeup as Ollie works?
Yeah, no, I'm not on the Hugh Grant as Ollie train.
Think about it and you will get there, because I wasn't on it either.
I mean, I think it would work well as a movie.
It was written as I wrote it cinematographically. Is that a word? I think it is. I wrote it cinematographically, whereas White Suicide was bought as a series. This has been bought as a film. It's a classical Somerset Maugham arc. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end.
We have 2 minutes left of our chat.
Oh wow, gone that quick.
It has. For anyone who's watching, do you want to give them a reminder of what they're off to buy?
Yes, a very simple story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, which I think you will find, because it's written in multiple chapters, short, brisk chapters. They're all written in the same timeline, with a cast of some really good characters. I don't think there's one bad character in there, so much as one person you think, oh, don't really want to read about him or her. Can you think of a bad character in there?
No, I mean, there's some people who do some bad things.
Yes, but not a bad character.
No. Do you want to show us the book cover again?
Yeah, sure, I'd love to. I've had fun doing this. Thank you.
Good.
There we go. It says uncorrected proof, because I'm afraid I'm not. Hope you can read it. Oh, and there's my name at the bottom. There we go.
And then all that's left to say is thanks for joining us.
No, thank you very much for having me on your show, and thank you to your listeners and or people who are viewing. Really enjoyed it. Thank you indeed.